What have you found to be common sticking points in implementing PPPs in Africa?
Well, the biggest sticking point to my mind is the capacity gap. It's now very clear to most governments on the continent that the budgets cannot stretch any further to cover infrastructure development. They need to work with the private sector. However, the private sector is this big unknown. They are usually associated with higher returns. And on the other side, you have mostly low-income population that cannot afford the basic services. So the government is faced with the challenge of meeting both expectations. However, the African Development Bank stands ready to advise the governments on how to deal with the private sector. We advise the government to use the solutions that have existed for years in other parts of the world. Project finance is one solution. The way projects should be structured in a PPP environment is well known. Those are tried and tested methods. The risk mitigation instruments are well known. So we give them the encouragement and the confidence to have those discussions with the private sector and the populations at large.
The lengthy processes. Because, you know, personally, I'm a PPP certified public-private partnership specialist. I appreciate everything to do with public-private partnerships. But somebody who does not appreciate what public-private partnerships are and is coming from the traditional procurement environment, they believe public-private partnerships are very lengthy, outdrawn, and they take a lot of time. And most of the implementers or decision makers have a short-term objectives because they are politicians. So you find a public-private partnership, a typical public-private partnership project can take like, for it to come out, because from the inception to the end can be like 5 to 6 years. So by this time somebody is out of office and the people whom he represents have not seen the outcome of what he intends to achieve from the public-private partnership. So you find there's a problem of understanding exactly expectations from the public-private partnership process, projects, and objectives.
It's global. PPPs are complex. You really need to dig in and understand what's going on. You need to pre-agree on a lot of things. And generally, something has different meanings to different parties. That has been the gap or cause for problems in PPPs, a common understanding of what needs to be done or what is being agreed to. But I think things are getting better. We've seen a few being executed successfully. We can learn from that. So this is why it's very important that the correct legal framework and institutional framework be in place for us to deliver, for the avoidance of conflicts around PPPs.
Well, there's plenty of projects and there's also plenty of money, but the problem is that the money is looking for the right risk-reward profile. So the challenge for PPPs is to make sure that the risk is mitigated as much as possible. And that can be done in one of two ways. Credit enhancement, where multilateral agencies can provide some support, but also in de-risking through increasing the quality of the institutions and the counterparties that private sector investors are going to engage with through the PPP process.
Well, there are quite a number of challenges, governance issues, regulatory issues, institutional issues. Specifically, if you talk about institutional issues, most of the private sector have complained about too much bureaucracy in the processes involved in actually undertaking PPPs in Ghana. Specifically, we would want to go according to a process and a cycle that we have defined. And relatively, this cycle says that we have to go through a full feasibility analysis of a project, look at the financial model, look at all the issues and identify the various risks, and try to apportion the risks to the various entities, that be the public or the private sector. But the private sector is always in a hurry, and most of them come specifically with unsolicited bids, and they expect that you jump at it and they just go ahead and implement those projects. So that has been a very big challenge for us in terms of the institutional framework.
I think the primary difficulties currently is, one, capacity, and that would be, I think, both on the government and the private sector, you have a lot of times where the understanding of the projects isn't there, which makes it difficult for the projects to be implemented properly. And I think that's one major issue. But then you now have times where, yes, there is good capacity on both sides, but some of those projects also get run into challenges because you might have the end users that could protest and say, we don't want to pay for that service. For example, well, we just have the toll roads in South Africa, for example, and there is protest going on and people not wanting to pay the tolls, which would ultimately affect the success of a PPP project. So let's just take say a PPP project is done and you build a new road and people just refuse to pay the tolls. Then that is a really challenging aspect. And so being able to have a structure that will ensure the revenue, or rather the tariffs, are affordable, and having enough consultation with the end users to ensure that they would pay over the lifetime of the contract is